Clint Eastwood ignites a firestorm. A Hollywood titan crushes host in a legendary TV clash. The stage is set for a television event that will be talked about for years. A Hollywood legend, a man who's defined cool for over 60 years, steps into the spotlight for a rare appearance. Clint Eastwood, at 94, walks onto Good Morning America. Said his presence, like a thundercloud rolling over a desert plain. The network executives are practically vibrating with excitement. Landing Eastwood is a coup of mythic proportions. He doesn't do morning shows. He doesn't do interviews often when he does. It's an event to plan as simple, a light-hearted chat about his latest film, a few nods to his iconic career, maybe a slick montage of his greatest hits, Dirty Harry, Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby. The audience will eat it up. George Stephanopoulos, the host, has his talking points polished and ready. The producers have a highlight reel prep to keep things warm, nostalgic, and safe. But from the moment Eastwood steps onto that set, something feels off. The air crackles with an unspoken tension. This isn't going to be a fluffy morning show segment. This is going to be a war. Eastwood moves with a slow, deliberate stride, the kind you'd expect from a gunslinger entering a saloon in a Sergio Leone classic. His steely blue eyes skin room sharp as a hawk's, taking in every detail. The crew feels it, the audience feels it. Even the cameras seem to hesitate as they focus on him. At 94, he's still a towering figure, lean, weathered, but unbowed, his face carved from decades of sun and struggle, carries the weight of a man who's seen it all and doesn't suffer fools. The studio is buzzing, but it's a nervous buzz, like the hum of a rattlesnake before it strikes. Good morning, Clint Stephanopoulos says, flashing a smile that's been honed by years of TV charm. Thanks for joining us today. Eastwood settles into the guest chair's frame, still imposing his voice, that gravelly drawl that's launched 1,000 imitations morning. He says, his expression neutral, but his eyes alert. If you've seen a fistful of dollars, you know that look neutral doesn't mean relaxed. It means ready for anything. The audience leans forward, sensing something big is coming. They're not wrong. The first few minutes go according to plan. Stephanopoulos lobs softballs about the new film, a gritty drama that's already generating Oscar buzz. Eastwood answers with a thoughtfulness that's defined his career. He talks about the story, a tale of redemption set in a small town, the kind of human drama he's always been drawn to. He praises the cast, young actors he handpicked for their raw talent, not their names. He speaks of his passion for filmmaking, a fire that still burns after all these years. The audience is captivated. This is a Clint they came to see, a living legend, still sharp, still in command. Still Clint. The producers in control room are grinning. This is going exactly as scripted. Ratings are going to soar. They can already see the headlines. Clint Eastwood charms GMA with tales of new film. But then, like a snake slipping out of the grass, Stephanopoulos shifts gears. Clint, you've been in this business for a very long time. He says, his tone changing ever so slightly. You've seen Hollywood change dramatically over the decades. Some would say the industry has become more socially conscious, more aware of representation and diversity. How do you feel about those changes? The question lands like a grenade. The studio goes quiet. Eastwood's eyes narrow just a fraction, but it's enough to make your pulse quicken. This isn't the cozy, chatty sign up for. This is an ambush, and Clint Eastwood doesn't take kindly to ambushes. Well, George, he says, his voice slow, deliberate, each word heavy with intent. I think good stories are good stories regardless of who tells them or who stars in them. I've always believed in hiring the best person for the job. It's a measured response, pure Eastwood, straight to the point, no fluff. But Stephanopoulos isn't satisfied. He leans, his eyes glinting like a prosecutor sensing a crack in the defense. But surely you recognize that the industry needed a change, that there were systemic issues that required addressing. The air grows colder. Eastwood's jaw tightens, a subtle warning sign that anyone who's watched the good, the bad, and the ugly would recognize. I think he says, his voice taking on that iconic edge. Good filmmaking has always been about telling honest stories with authentic characters. Politics and agendas tend to get in the way of that. The audience shifts in their seats, sensing the shift. The producers in the control room exchange nervous glances. Camera operators adjust their lenses, zooming in on Eastwood's face. This isn't a morning show fluff piece anymore. It is showdown, and Eastwood's hand is on the trigger. Stephanopoulos, smelling blood, pushes harder. But isn't it political to ignore these issues too? To pretend that representation doesn't matter? Eastwood's eyes flash, and you can almost hear the man with no name theme swelling in the background. I'm not pretending anything, he says, his voice calm, but laced with steel. I'm saying that when you start making movies to check boxes instead of telling stories, you end up with propaganda, not entertainment. The studio falls silent. Camera operators freeze, their lenses locked on Eastwood. The producers are sweating now, their dreams of feel-good Segment evaporating this is either going to be a ratings bonanza or a PR nightmare. Stephanopoulos, either oblivious or emboldened, keeps digging. Some might say that's the privilege of someone who's never had to worry about representation. That word privilege is like waving a red flag in front of bull. Eastwood leans forward, his gaze piercing, his voice dropping to a low growl. Privileged son, I grew up during the Depression. I dug swimming pools and worked in a steel mill before I ever set foot on a movie set. I earned everything I got through hard work, not through anyone's idea of what I deserved, because of who I was. The audience is riveted, hanging on every word. You could hear a pin drop. Stephanopoulos, now visibly rattled, but too deep to back out, tries again. But you have to admit the industry was different, and opportunities weren't equally available to everyone. Eastwood's response is swift, brutal, and pure. Clint, the industry was tough on everyone. He shoots back. I spent years getting rejected, playing bit parts, working for practically nothing. Nobody handed me anything because I was white or male or anything else. I succeeded because I kept working when other people gave up. The tension is thicker than the fog in high plains. Drifted. The producers are in full panic mode, whispering frantically in the control room. This is going off the rails. Stephanopoulos, his composure cracking like thin ice, tries to pivot. I think you're missing the point. The system itself was biased. The system was tough. Eastwood corrects, his voice steady but sharp as a blade. There's a difference between something being difficult and something being unfair. Life isn't supposed to be easy. Movies aren't supposed to be therapy sessions where everyone gets a participation trophy. The audience gasps. This isn't an interview anymore. It's a verbal duel, and Eastwood is outdrawing his opponent. At every turn, Stephanopoulos, now visibly flustered, presses on like a man who doesn't know he's already lost. So you don't think there were barriers that prevented talented people from getting opportunities? Eastwood's response is pure dynamite. I think there are always barriers, he says, his eyes locked on Stephanopoulos, like a predator sizing up prey. The question is whether you spend your time complaining about them or finding ways to overcome them. By now, the interview is completely derailed. What was supposed to be a promotional chat has turned into a full-blown confrontation, and Stephanopoulos isn't backing down. If anything, Eastwood's calm defiance seems to fuel him. But surely you can acknowledge that your generation of filmmakers had advantages that others didn't, he says, his tone growing aggressive. Eastwood's expression hardens. My generation, he says, his voice low and dangerous. You mean the generation that fought in World War II, the generation that built this country into what it became, that generation. Stephanopoulos, realizing he stepped into a minefield, tries to clarify. I mean the generation that controlled Hollywood for decades, while keeping others out the studio. Falls deathly silent. Even the crew stops, moving their eyes glued to the unfolding drama. Eastwood leans back in his chair, studying Stephanopoulos like he's sizing up a villain in a spaghetti western. George, he says, his voice a low rumble, I think you've got me confused with someone else. I've never kept anyone out of anything. I've hired actors and crew members based on one thing, their ability to do the job, period. Stephanopoulos, sensing he's losing ground, doubles down. That's easy to say now, but the record speaks for itself. How many of your films feature diverse casts? How many women directors did you champion? Eastwood's hands grip the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening the record. He says, his voice cutting like a knife, let me tell you about the record, son. I made movies about subjects that mattered. I told stories about real people facing real challenges. I didn't cast actors to fill quotas. I cast them because they were the best for the role. And as for directors, I've mentored plenty of people, men and women, who had the talent and the drive to make it. You don't get to where I am by playing gatekeeper. You get there by working your ass off and telling stories that resonate. The audience erupts in applause, unable to hold back any longer. Stephanopoulos, now red-faced, foundering again. But Clint, don't you think the industry has a responsibility to address past inequities, to make sure everyone is a seat at the table? Eastwood's response is a masterclass in control fury. The industry's responsibility is to make good movies, he says, his voice steady, but laced with fire. If you're focused on anything else, agendas, politics, whatever, you're not making art, you're making noise. And I've never been in the business of making noise. The studio is electric. Now the audience hanging on every word. The producers are torn between panic and awe. This is TV gold, but it's also a train wreck. Stephanopoulos, desperate to salvage the segment, tries one last time. I think what I'm trying to say is that the world has changed, and maybe Hollywood needed to catch up. Don't you agree? Eastwood leans forward, his eyes boring into Stephanopoulos. The world's always changing, he says, but good storytelling. Doesn't he want to talk about catch up to the idea that people want stories that mean something, not lectures disguised as entertainment? And with that, the interview is effectively over. Stephanopoulos, outmatched and outgunned, fumbles through a weak transition to a commercial break. We'll be right back He says his voice strained his smile, forced the camera's cutaway, but the audience is still buzzing, whispering to each other, some clapping, others just staring in awe. Eastwood sits back calm, as ever like he's just dispatched a gang of outlaws in a dusty canyon. As the crew scrambles to reset the set, the producers are in chaos. Social media is already exploding, clips of the interview going viral before the segment. Even ends Clint Eastwood, just destroyed. Stephanopoulos, one post screams legend, doesn't play woke games. Another declares the X platform is ablaze with reactions from fans hailing Eastwood as a truth-teller. ISIS clutching their pearls over his outdated views. But one thing is clear: nobody's talking about the movie anymore. They're talking about Clint. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated. Subscribe for more powerful video.